exactly what cyberpsychology is.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Cyberpsychology is the study of the impact of emerging technology on human behavior. So it was considered a sort of an emerging discipline, but now it's actually an established discipline within the behavioral sciences.
And we'll just go into the celebrity thing for a minute, if you don't mind. CSI Cyber, there's a program on RT2 every week called CSI Cyber, starring Patricia Arquette. Patricia Arquette is a cyber psychologist, and she's based on you, isn't that right?
Yeah, Patricia's an actress who plays a cyber psychologist, and the series was actually inspired by my work in cyber psychology. I mean, nobody was more surprised than me to get a call from CBS. I actually thought it was a hoax and didn't pay too much attention to it, but they were persistent. They kept saying, when are you going to come and see us? And I didn't think anything would come of it. In fact, I thought I had a meeting with an intern called Nina, and it turned out the intern was the president of CBS. 15-minute meeting turned into a 2-hour meeting, and then at the end of the meeting they said, we're going to do a television show based on your work. So first and foremost, I'm an academic, and CBS and CSI Cyber is an incredible platform to reach out, to entertain, but also to educate and to inform.
And in terms of the education and information, I guess, I mean, the title of this talk is Me, My Selfie and I, and we were talking about, since cyber psychology is a whole new form of psychology to cater for this interaction between people and technology. The thing, when I heard the title of it, the thing that occurred to me was, I mean, if you take a selfie, it's quite a distinct thing from just what we used to do in photographs, in that you can, sort of angle your face and do a fish mouth or something like that to make yourself look better, to post a better version of yourself online. But what I'm wondering is that so different from in the 90s when you went through 50 photos and chose the best one to put in a frame on the wall?
I think that it's a good question in terms of, the debate that we talk about is real world and virtual world. And there's a sort of a false dichotomy that these two things are separate. What happens in the virtual world impacts on the real world. What happens in the real world impacts on the virtual world. And, in this room, we're all grown-ups, so it doesn't make much difference in terms of our online behavior because we're sort of done, we're cooked. We're just going to lose neurons going forward. But for children going through these incredible developmental growth stages, technology can impact on them in specific ways. So you spoke about children. If you think of a child who maybe is 9 or 10 or 11 and they're going through or just coming up to what we would call in psychology Erikson's identity formation period, when they create this virtual self on an online platform, which is a highly curated form of self, it's the self as an artifact. And they manipulate that to give themselves better skin or stretch themselves to be taller or shinier hair. They are popular, evidenced by the number of connections that they have. We as behavioral scientists, we don't understand the impact of that sort of splitting of self onto multiple platforms and what that does in a developmental context in terms of how the child actually reaches maturity in a psychological and identity context.
And is there actually a split? I mean, because I guess when you deal with social media, I guess we're all adults, but we do understand that what you put on Facebook or what you put on Instagram is sort of a celebrity version of yourself. You know what I mean? It's totally polished. It's none of the bad bits. And children, is it that they don't understand that they confuse the two? Or what's happening there?
I think that it's very much exploratory in terms of they're looking for self, but I would caution against, overly using those platforms at particular ages because we don't know the impact of that. In 5 years' time or 10 years' time, when we have the longitudinal studies, we can say, well, this is what happens. George Herbert Mead, back in the 1930s, had this division in terms of pronouns, where he said that I was the reflective self. So if we think of that in a real world context, that's the real world self. And he talked about me, and this is 1930, me where it's the self as an object. So I would say with young children, you have the real world self, but then you can have the self becoming an object, an artifact. And what happens, or we have to question, what happens when the poor real world self can no longer live up to this highly curated and highly manipulated self? Does that result in some sort of interpsychic split or conflict? And I have a personal theory, and I don't have the research to back it up as yet, that the root of cyberbullying may lie in the fact that if a child creates this fantastic evolution of self, and if that is the best that they can be, as pretty or popular or active as they can be, and if that is told it's not good enough and called ugly or a loser, then is that not devastating in a psychological way, where the virtual self could turn back to the real world self and say, well, me, the fabulous creation, if I'm not good enough, you, the thing in the basement, you certainly are not good enough. And this may be a pathway to low self-esteem and, in fact, to self-harm. So what I'm saying really is, I think the behavioral sciences have been blindsided by evolutions of technology. You know, I first studied psychology back in the day, and when I first came across artificial intelligence in the 90s, I was fascinated, but almost simultaneously realized that nothing in my training to date could equip me to understand the impact of technology on human behavior. So I went back to college. I went back to do a master's in cyberpsychology and then on to do my PhD in forensic cyberpsychology, because I believe cyberpsychology as a discipline can provide insight at that intersection between humans and technology, illuminate the space, and come up with the solutions.
Is there any advantage to having a self on social media for people who maybe might be socially awkward or who don't particularly like themselves, and maybe they can, I guess, project a version of themselves that is better, but maybe that interacts better with people if they're socially awkward or something like that? Or is that something that
I think that there are great platforms whereby people can actually socially engage, and we have to look at the positives and say, back in the day when I wanted to go to the movies, you had to go to the local supermarket, sit on a wall and wait for your friends to turn up because you weren't even allowed to use the phone and it was too expensive. And, that's how you sort of syndicated to agree to do something together. Never has it been easier for youth to connect, to find each other, to find things that they want to go to, and actually to be social. So that's that interplay between virtual and real. And that's normal social activity. But I'm really concerned about understanding the impact so that we as behavioral scientists can advise parents. I'm writing a book at the moment, and chapter 1 is the impact, it's called Cyber Babies, the impact of emerging technology on the developing infant aged 0 to 2. Do you know that the American Pediatric Association recommend 0 screen time for children under the age of 2? Parents don't know this. They're happily passing the mobile phone to the child. And there are lots of reasons why you should wait before you give a child that's going through, I spoke about psychological development. An infant between 0 and 2 is going through incredible physiological development in terms of their visual acuity. Do you really want to stick fake perspective and dimension in front of them for an hour or two, a video, while 700 neurons are firing a second that are figuring out what does depth mean? These children, an hour could be 20% of their waking period. What does that do to the development of their visual systems? We don't know the answer. There's a great paper called The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown. And as a scientist, I would be concerned about the unknown. And I think until we know the answers, we've got to take a cautious approach.
So is it up to the parents then to act as guardians? Well, I mean, obviously, if they're children, I mean, that's your job as a parent, but...
I think when it comes to technology, I'm unashamedly pro-technology. I just want to make sure, from a behavioral sciences perspective, that we understand. And then when we understand, we can advise best practice. I object to the fact that, as a society, we have made parents almost exclusively responsible for children in a cyber context. Now, particularly when it comes to, say, legal but age-inappropriate content online. So that would be adult pornography, that would be extreme violence, that would be torture, entities that children should not be looking at. And I've actually just come back from The Hague, from a UN event, where our research center has been involved in lobbying the UN to reconsider the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child and actually enshrine the cyber rights of a child. Because in an age of ubiquitous technology, it is impossible for parents to protect their children. Multiple devices, free Wi-Fi, other children's homes with unfiltered content online. How do you protect children when there is so much access? But here's the thing. If a child looks at distressing and extreme content, and we're talking about a minor, a young child, 8, 9, 10, whether it's the caregiver or the device manufacturer or the internet service provider or the search engine or the entity that hosts the content or generated the content, that child will be psychologically damaged over time as a result of looking at extreme content frequently. And all of those entities, in my opinion, are participating in the collective abuse of a child. And this is a societal issue. We have to consider good practice, and we have to consider cyber ethics. And most importantly, a child has a right to innocence. They have a right to a childhood. And under the UN Convention, they have a right to healthy mental and physical development. So, yes, freedom of the net, yes, new frontier, yes, freedom of speech, but not at any cost, and not at the cost of the rights of the child.
And do you think we're going to be able to compel all these people to do something about it? Because apart from parents, parents are the only people who are mentioned in the same sentence as responsibility in any of this stuff when it comes to children and the internet.
I think the thing is that we have really been, from a societal perspective, we've been sleepwalking our way into an age of technology. We adopt each new technological development with the collective wisdom of lemmings leaping off a cliff. The point at which somebody develops an app that allows children to take indecent images of themselves and send them that the images will dissolve is the point at which you're actually facilitating covert and illegal behavior in children. So really, it's not about regulation and it's not about making laws, because we will never be able to regulate at the pace that we will need to keep up with evolutions in technology. It's really about ethics. It's about good practice, and mostly it's about common sense. And it's about responsibility. In the real world, we do not expect parents to man the doors to public bars to stop people under 18 buying a drink. We don't expect them to be standing at cigarette counters. Why do we expect them to be almost exclusively responsible for protecting children in a cyber context? It's not fair. It's a collective responsibility. They say in Africa that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, this too is true in cyberspace.
The thing is, this is all very worrying, especially as a parent of young children, right? It's quite even dystopian when you think about it. You know, the interaction of your children and technology, and basically the unknown is the thing that is the most scary, because by the time we find out what is damaging and what isn't, it's going to be too late. Is there any solution in sight? I mean, what on earth can we do?
I think the first thing that we have to do is actually discuss, have a conversation, And, you know, again, I'm, as somebody who is an observer to the Interpol Specialist Group for Crimes Against Children, I see the worst of technology. I see the worst of what can happen online, and I remain optimistic because the solutions lie within technology itself. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite movies is called The Usual Suspects. And there's a line in it that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to convince us that he didn't exist. If you take the scourge of cyberbullying, the greatest trick the social media companies have ever pulled is to convince us they can do nothing about it. I want you to think about it differently. Real-world bullying is a problem. Why? Because there's no evidence. A punch in the playground or horrible word. Cyberbullying, by definition, is nothing but evidence. How did we ever get to a point where that was a bigger problem than real-world bullying? So really, it's about thinking of it. I'm working with a company in Silicon Valley at the moment on a mathematical algorithm to detect cyberbullying. It's maths. Absolutely. The words, bitch, hate, die, content, direction, I'm bullying you, C by D, I by F, interval by frequency equals E equals escalation. It's mathematics. It is very simple. But what we need to do is have a collective will to back these proposals. We're talking about children. I'm not talking about interfering with the rights and the freedoms of those who are over 18. I'm talking about minors, young children. Can you imagine if you had an algorithm sitting on a telecom as a parent, whereby as soon as the algorithm was triggered that your child was being targeted, that you got a digital alert? No breach of parental privacy between the parent and the child because you're not snooping and reading their emails or their messages, which, by the way, is very bad practice. Don't do that because it just drives the behavior underground. And also the research shows that parents that adopt that sort of surveillance, that the child, when they do get into trouble, that the last person they want to turn to is the parent. And they fear confiscation of the technologies. Another point, just while we're talking about it, the point at which your child does something wrong and you want to punish them, you know, they broke their curfew or they didn't clean up their bedroom, please resist the urge that it's your first instinct to confiscate their technology. Give me your phone, give me your computer, go to your room. If you think about it, the point at which your 13-year-old hates you, hates themselves, hates the world, and you sent them to their bedroom, you have deprived them of their entire support system. You don't want to do that. So really, it's down to a perspective. I'm a cyber behavioral profiler. That's what I do. My background is in forensics. And effectively, I look at the problems differently. And I am absolutely optimistic that we can use technology to address technology-facilitated problem behaviors. The solution lies within technology itself. Technology is not good or bad. It is either used well or poorly by humans.
In the meantime, I believe you're writing a book for parents. I, for one, will be buying it. Mary Aiken, thank you very much indeed. Mary Aiken, everybody.
Thank you for your time.